Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're going to be covering the full list of Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge. It is the entire list, so it is going to be a longer video, just so you guys know. I will put in chapters so that you can see specifically the types of monsters that you want, and so that you can see the effects of those cards if and when you desire. I'll also be making these as clips in smaller videos so you can see those specific monsters. Winged Karibo level 6 is a light attribute fairy type level 6 monster with 300 attack and 200 defense. This card is always treated as an elemental hero and a favourite card. It cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned from your hand or graveyard by banishing one elemental hero fusion monster or one Winged Karibo from your hand face up on the field or graveyard. You can only special summon Winged Karibo level 6 once per turn this way. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, or your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, as a quick effect, you contribute this card, destroy that one monster, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. This card, it's dressed very much like the Flame Wingman and the Elemental Hero, and this, as we go into, will kind of all make sense. It being level 6 makes reasonable sense. It's Winged Karibo level 6. There are two other versions, there's a level 9 and there's also a level 10. And because this can be treated as both an elemental hero and a favourite card, it both supports those archetypes. It can only be summoned by banishing an elemental hero fusion monster, so it has to be specifically that type of card, or a Winged Karibo. Much easier to do, as Winged Karibo can be effectively brought out, it's just a weak monster. This can instantly be special summoned, and when an opponent's monster just attacks or activates a effect, you're able to instantly destroy that monster and inflict burn damage to the opponent equal to its original attack. So you're able to use instantly the Elemental Hero Flame Wingman effect, as well as cause an opponent's monster's destruction. Shining Star Dragon is a light attribute dragon type tuner at level 4 with 0 attack and defense. During your opponent's main phase, if this card is in your hand as a quick effect, you can target one dragon synchro monster in your graveyard, special summon this card, and if you do, special summon that monster, but negate its effects. Then immediately after this effect resolves, you can synchro summon one dragon synchro monster using this card you control. You can only use this effect of Shining Star Dragon once per turn. A dragon monster that was synchro summoned using this card as material cannot be destroyed by battle. So this is emphasized very much on the Crimson Dragon, as you can see the kind of design on the card. There are a few other cards that have that kind of likeness to them. It's a tuner monster, so it can be used as part of a synchro summon, and it's during your opponent's turn. If this card is in the hand, you're just able to take a dragon synchro monster in your graveyard. You are able to special summon both this card and the card that you targeted with this effect, but the only downside is that its effect is then negated. But if you can then tune using the monsters you have on the field, you can hopefully go into something like a Shooting Quasar Dragon or a Cosmic Blazar Dragon, any of those. This also provides your dragon monster that was synchro summoned using this as a material with battle protection, which isn't bad, considering many higher level monsters will have their own other versions of protection based effects. Full Armoured Utopic Ray Lancer is a water attribute beast warrior type Exceeds monster. It's a rank 4 with 2500 attack and 600 defense. It requires 3 level 4 monsters to summon it, and once per turn you can also Exceed summon a Full Armoured Utopic Ray Lancer by discarding one spell or trap card and using one rank 4 or lower Exceeds monster you control. Transfer its materials to this card. Monsters your opponent controls lose 500 attack points, and at the start of the battle phase, you can negate the effects of all attack position monsters your opponent currently controls. When this attacking card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can detach one material from this card. It can make a second attack in a row. The summon condition on this card initially isn't too complicated, it just requires 3 level 4 monsters, but you could also Exceed summon this card by just discarding a spell or trap and using a rank 4 or lower Exceeds monster that you control, so you have so many varieties of cards. Any materials that go from that card actually just get transferred onto this, so you're not losing out on materials to use this effect. Monsters your opponent control lose 500 attack points, so it does have a stat reduction points to it, and At the start of the battle phase, you're just able to shut down all of your opponent's attack position monsters' effects, so that's a good way of kind of cutting them down. This is in keeping with Black Ray Lancer's effect, which pretty much did the same thing, but required its material in order to do so. If this card is successful in destroying an opponent's monster battle, this card can attack once again in a row. Now, this isn't restricted to just on monsters, it can actually also be a direct attack, provided that you've successfully destroyed a monster, it's fine. This isn't an effect that is overwhelmingly, broken, but it's a good way of kind of adding more damage to the board. Bryonic, the magical ice dragon, is a water attribute sea serpent synchro monster, level 6 with 2300 attack and 1400 defense. It requires 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters. If this card is synchro summoned, you can discard 1 card, then target 1 card on the field, return it to the hand. If this card is special summoned from the graveyard, you can discard 1 card, then target 1 card on the field, return it to the hand. You can only use each effect of the magical ice dragon once per turn. This is an alternative version to the original Bryonic, as this, I think, was in the latest kind of ice barrier structure deck, and there was also a new version of Trisha that was also in there. That was kind of an upgrade. This is pretty much the same stats, similar style of effect, but it also takes into account not only when this card is synchro summoned, but if this card is ever special summoned, considering that once it's actually been synchro summoned and actually sent to the graveyard, you can actually properly revive it, and would therefore deem it a special summon. It is also a discard cost, so you are taking a trade-off in using either of these 2 effects, but both effects do the same thing. It's just each effect is limited to once a turn, so at most you can return 2 monsters to your opponent's hand, but at the cost of 2 of your own cards for discard. Lancia, Ancestral Dragon of the Ice Mountain, is a water attribute dragon type synchro effect monster. It's a level 10 with 3300 attack and 2700 defense. It requires a water tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters. Once per chain, if your opponent special summons a monster except during the damage step, you can special summon 1 ice barrier monster from your hand, deck, extra deck, or graveyard. Then you can change 1 attack position monster your opponent controls to defense position. You can only use this effect of Lancia, Ancestral Dragon of the Ice Mountain, twice per turn. If this face-up synchro summoned card in its owner's control leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you can special summon 1 ice barrier synchro monster from your extra deck. This is treated as a synchro summon. This card is very good for the deck and actually greatly improves how the strategy works. It does require a specific water tuner monster, and so you have to run it in quite a specific style of deck, but the non-tuners are generic. And it just activates per chain, so if your opponent activates something as part of a chain, you're instantly able to special summon an ice barrier monster that can come from your hand, deck, extra deck, or graveyard. Keeping in mind that extra deck is that key word in there, because you're able to get the other extra deck monsters out there who can then use their effects. For example, Trishula can banish cards, and Bryonic is able to return monsters back to the hand. So if he targets an extra deck monster, that actually goes back to their extra deck, which mitigates the level of resources they've had to use to bring that monster out in the first place. You're then able to take an attack position monster your opponent controls and switch it to defense position. That's actually perfect because it will then stop it from attacking for the rest of that turn, especially if it's just been summoned. This isn't either an issue either, as if this card happens to be leaving the field because of an opponent's card, you're able to instantly just bring out another Ice Barrier Synchro monster from the extra deck. Since it's considered also a Synchro summon, it means it will instantly get access to their effects. Georgius, Swordsman of the Ice Barrier, is a water attribute winged beast tuner effect monster. It's a level 6 with 2000 attack and 1200 defense. While you control another Ice Barrier monster, your opponent cannot activate the effects of monsters in the graveyard. You can only use each of the following effects of Georgius, Swordsman of the Ice Barrier, once per turn. If you control an Ice Barrier monster, you can special summon this card from your hand in defense position. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon one at level 5 or lower Ice Barrier monster from your hand or graveyard. Most of the ice barriers have their own types of limitations to whatever your opponent can do, whether that be restricting the number of spell or trap cards they can play, the number of monsters they have, the number of attacks they can make, even actually making an attack on a monster. If you've got the Fox one out, I think the tuner has a restriction on that one as well, even negating effects. This one has the ability to just shut down any abilities from your opponent's graveyard of any monsters, so that in itself is a mini Necro Valley style of effect. The other ability of this card happens to be you're just instantly able to special summon this card and then revive a level 5 or lower ice barrier, be that from the hand or the graveyard. The downside of this is, since it's summoned in defense position, it is going to have the weakest stat lineup for it, but since it's also tuner, maybe within the same turn you might want to go for a synchro play. Mirror Mage of the Ice Barrier is a water attribute aqua type tuner effect monster. It's a level 2 with 1000 attack and 400 defense. You contribute one other effect monster, special them up to 3 Ice Barrier tokens. They're at water level 1 with 0 attack and defense, and if you do, increase this card's level by that number. Also, you cannot special summon from the edge deck for the rest of this turn except water synchro monsters. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add one of your Ice Barrier cards that is banished or in your deck to your hand, except Mirror Mage of the Ice Barrier. You can only use each effect of Mirror Mage of the Ice Barrier once per turn. This is one of the perfect types of tuners, as it has its own way of bringing out various cards without much effort. Just by tributing another effect monster, you can bring out up to 3 Ice Barrier tokens. These being level 1 means if you tune that alongside those, you can bring out a level 5 water synchro monster. Bear in mind it does lock you into that, but it's better that it locks you into that than for it to lock you purely into ice barriers, as you could splash this into other styles of decks. When this card is sent to the graveyard, you're just instantly able to search for an ice barrier that happens to be banished, or from the deck to the hand, which can be useful for you later on. Frozen Domain of the Ice Barrier is a continuous trap card. Your opponent can activate cards or effects in response to the activation of your Ice Barrier monster effects. If a monster is special summoned from the edge deck except during the damage step, you can return it to the hand or shuffle into the deck one Ice Barrier monster you control. Then you can place one card from the field or either graveyard on the bottom of the deck. You can only use this effect of Frozen Domain of the Ice Barrier once per turn. Once per turn during your end phase, reveal 3 Ice Barrier monsters with different names in your extra deck, or destroy this card. So this card is supposed to be supporting the Ice Barrier cards and the monsters themselves. Your opponent just cannot activate cards or effects in response to Ice Barrier monster activations. That's perfect, as a lot of them have to activate in order for you to successfully do something. This gives them kind of the ability to protect themselves when activating their effects. And if a monster is special summoned from the edge deck, you can return it to the hand or shuffle into the deck just one Ice Barrier monster you control. You are then able to take a card from the field or either graveyard and place it on the bottom of the deck. That can be useful if your opponent has a particular strategy, or you know that they've kind of sent something already to the graveyard in hope to use it later within the turn or within the duel. It makes it more difficult for them to then reach that card without having to specifically search for it. This has a downside in that you have to reveal 3 Ice Barrier monsters with different names in the extra deck to keep this card on the field, but you've got more than those, so unless your opponent is running one of those style decks that actually rips apart your extra deck, you should be in a fine situation. This is not likely to have to kind of self-destruct. Arms of Genix Return 0 is a Dart Attribute Machine type Synchro level 10 with 3100 attack and 2950 defense. It requires a Dart tuner monster and one or more non-tuner monsters. When your opponent activates a monster effect, as a quick effect, you can banish one monster from your graveyard with the same attribute, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. You can only banish each attribute once per turn to activate this effect of Arms of Genix Return 0. Once per turn, you can target up to 6 of your Genix monsters with different attributes that are banished and or in your graveyard, shuffle them into the deck, then you can destroy up to that many cards in the spell and trap zones. This is quite a decent card for them. It is requiring quite a bit of setup, as you do need the various monsters to make a level 10 monster. I know that some of the GNX cards are level 3 or level 4. You do have some of the synchro monsters which are 5, 6 and 7. So they can actually make this card not too badly, but it does require quite an investment. As soon as your opponent activates a monster effect, just by banishing a monster from the graveyard, so long as it's got the same attribute, you just get to negate and destroy that monster. Bear in mind that I think a lot of the GX cards have their own attributes. It's one of those types of decks, similar to Yangzin, that have a monster for each attribute, so meeting that requirement isn't a problem. It also means that each turn you can just return your GX monsters with different attributes that are banished or in the graveyard into the deck. So by resetting them, hopefully you can then send them back to the graveyard to banish them to retry for this card's first effect, and then just destroy up to that many cards in the opponent's spell and trap zones. This can be useful as a way of wiping out your opponent's cards, but then again, it doesn't negate them, so if your opponent is able to activate anything, they'll just use that and you'll have wasted this effect. Repair GNX Controller is a Dart Attribute Machine type length effect monster. It's got 1200 attack and it's a link 1. It requires a 1 level 4 or lower GNX monster. You can only special summon and repair a GNX Controller once per turn. If this card is link summoned, you can add 1 GNX monster from your graveyard to your hand. Once per chain, if a GNX monster is added to your hand except by drawing it, you can accept during a damage step. Immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon 1 GNX monster. Also, you cannot special from the edge deck for the rest of this turn, except synchro summon using a GNX tuner as material. The requirement on this card is a level 4 or lower GNX monsters. There's plenty of them, so it's not a restriction. As soon as this card is kind of link summoned, you can add a GNX monster from the graveyard back to the hand, so there is some form of recovery. And if that happens, then you're able to immediately normal summon that GNX monster. You are locked into only being able to synchro summon, and specifically only those synchro monsters that require a GNX tuner as material, but it's a good way of adding consistency to the deck without making it, access all synchro monsters. Our GNX Undyne is a water attribute aqua type level 4 with 1700 attack and 1100 defense. Once per turn, you can banish 1 GNX monster from your graveyard. This card gains that monster's attribute. Then, if you banished a tuner to activate this effect, you can treat this card as a tuner until the end of this turn. If you control a GNX Synchro monster, you can target 2 GNX monsters in your graveyard, including this card, add them to your hand. Also, for the rest of this turn, any card sent to your graveyard is banished instead. So there's a lot to unpack with this card. Firstly, 1700 for a level 4 monster isn't bad. A lot of the GNX monsters can be quite weak. And just by banishing a GNX monster, you're able to take that monster's attributes. Useful for going into various synchro monsters, as they get their effects based on the attributes that are used to summon them. So you might want to kind of fixate on a particular attribute to get the desired effect for that moment in time. If you happen to have banished a tuner to use this effect, this card is also treated as a tuner for the rest of the turn, so it means that you can actually go into that synchro play a lot easier. It happens to also mean that you can target 2 GNX monsters in your graveyard, so long as you've got the GNX Synchro monster, and including this card, and add them to your hand, which helps to support the recovery as you use a lot of resources. It does also mean that the downside is any cards that for the rest of the turn get banished rather than being sent to the graveyard, making it more difficult to recover those cards. Our GNX Turing is a Dart Attribute Spellcaster type tuner effect monster. It's a level 2 with 600 attack and defense. During your opponent's main phase, if you control a GNX monster, as a quick effect you can special summon this card from your hand. Then immediately after this effect resolves, you can synchro summon 1 GNX Synchro monster. You can only use this effect of GNX tuning once per turn. This card on the field can be treated as a level 1 or 3 monster when used for a synchro summon of a GNX Synchro monster. The purpose of this card is it's effectively a tuner which helps to bring out a variety of different synchro monsters. It can activate, provided you have a Genix monster on your field. You can just special summon this card and then instantly synchro summon on your opponent's turn. So it's very similar to kind of like an Excel synchro. It also being able to manipulate its levels between 1, 2, and 3 means, depending on your situation, you can go into your desired synchro monster. This is quite similar to a couple of other cards. I mean, even, for example, within Speedroids, they can actually modularize their levels in such a way as to kind of go into the various synchro monsters. There are other examples out there that can do very similar things. If you think of the shark cards, a lot of them are able to adapt their levels between 3, 4, and 5 to go into rank 3, 4, or 5 monsters. Infernoid Evil is a fire attribute fiend type fusion effect monster. It's a level 1 with 1100 attack and 1100 defense. It requires 2 Infernoid monsters, and if this card is fusion summoned, you can banish 1 Infernoid monster from your graveyard, send Infernoid monsters with different names from your deck to the graveyard, equal to the banished monster's level. If this card is sent to the graveyard or banished, you can add 1 Void spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Infernoid Evil once per turn. This card is useful for kind of setting up for your Infernoid plays as they do summon themselves from the graveyard. And simply by banishing an Infernoid monster from the graveyard, you're just able to refuel your graveyard by sending Infernoid monsters equal to the banished monster's level. So the higher the monster you banish, the more monsters you can actually send to that graveyard. The summoning requirement on this card isn't difficult, as it just needs 2 generic Infernoid monsters. You'll be running pretty much at least 1 or 2 copies of each, and it doesn't have to be either same name or different names. It can be a combination of either. And if this card is sent to the graveyard or banished, you're just able to search for a Void spell or trap card straight from the deck to the hand, so it adds the consistency to the deck. Infernoid Flood is a fire attribute fiend type link monster. It's a rank 4 with 3000 attack points. It requires 2+ monsters, including an Infernoid monster. When your opponent would special summon a monster as a quick effect, you contribute 1 monster, negate the summon, and if you do, banish that monster. If a card is banished from your graveyard except during a damage step, you can banish 1 card on the field. If this linked summoned card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can special 1 Infernoid monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. You can only use each effect of Infernoid Flood once per turn. The summoning on this is not too tricky. As long as you've got at least 1 Infernoid monster, you can actually bring this out, but it does require usually the 4 monsters to summon it. As soon as your opponent special summons a monster, you're just able to tribute a monster and not only negate the summon, but banish that monster, so it doesn't even get to use its effect if it has one. Also, you're able to banish a card on the field if a card happens to be banished from your graveyard, which is very common within the Infernoids. Once this link summon card simply leaves the field because it's destroyed by an opponent's card, whether that be by card effect or by battle destruction, you're just able to bring out any Infernoid monster, and you can just ignore its summoning conditions. Void Reignition is a normal spell card. Its effect is to reveal 1 Inferno monster or 1 Void spell or trap card in your hand, discard your entire hand, then draw the same number of cards you discarded. If you control no monsters or all monsters you control are fiend monsters, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target up to 11 of your banished Inferno monsters with different names, return them to the graveyard. You can only use this effect of Void Reignition once per duel. This card's effect just requires you to reveal an Infernoid monster or a Void spell or trap card. You're then able to discard your entire hand and draw the same number of cards, so actually if you need to refresh your hand, that's an option you can use. And you're just drawing the same number of cards. Think of it a bit like a magical mallet, but for the Infernoid archetype. If you have no monsters or all monsters you control are fiend monsters, that's pretty much the only typing that Infernoid monsters have, provided it's not on the same turn that this card was sent to the graveyard. Just by banishing this card, I don't know why they're looking at the 11 targets of banished Infernoids and recovering those cards back to the graveyard. I'm guessing that might be the total number of different named ones that you can currently have. This is only able to be used once per duel, so you should only ever consider running one of this card. Void Breach is a continuous spell card. The effect is Inferno monsters you control gain 100 attack for each of your banished Inferno monsters. If you control no monsters or all monsters you control are Fiend monsters, you can activate one of these effects. Add one of your banished Inferno monsters to your hand, or special summon one Inferno monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions. You can only use this effect of Void Breach once per turn. So with this, your Inferno monsters get a stat boost for each of your banished Inferno monsters, so the more you've got, actually the more powerful they become. And if you control no monsters or all monsters are Fiend types, so that's again very similar to Infernoids, you're either able to recover one of your banished Inferno monsters back to the hand, or you're able to just special summon an Inferno monster from your hand, and it's regardless of its summoning conditions, making it very easy to bring out some of your bigger threats. Spiritual Beast Tamer Lara is a light attribute psychic type level 1 with 100 attack and a 2000 defense. You can only special summon a Spiritual Beast Tamer Lara once per turn. You can discard this card immediately after this resolves, normal summon one Ritual Beast monster from your hand. If a Ritual Beast card you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your field or graveyard instead. If this card is banished, you can special summon one Ritual Beast monster from your deck, except Spiritual Beast Tamer Lara. You can only use each effect of Spiritual Beast Tamer Lara once per turn. This card is actually very useful for the deck, as you, just by discarding this card, can instantly normal summon a Ritual monster from the hand, and if a Ritual Beast you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, just by banishing this card, it substitutes the destruction for itself. If this card happens to be banished, so even from that previous effect, you're just able to special summon a Ritual Beast monster from the deck, and that will be the one that you need for that particular moment. Ritual Beast Ulti Nochi Drago is a light attribute worm type fusion at level 7 with 2400 attack and 1900 defense. It requires a Ritual Beast Tamer monster and a Spiritual Beast monster, and must be special summoned from your X deck by banishing the cards from your field and or graveyard. You can only special summon Ritual Beast Ulti Nochi Drago once per turn. Your opponent cannot target other Ritual Beast monsters you control with card effects. As a quick effect, you can return this card to the Etch deck, then target one of your banished Ritual Beast monsters, special summon it, but it cannot attack directly. The way that the Ritual Beasts like to work is they like to tag out each other, very similar to the Gladiator Beasts. In other words, with this card, because it's able to tag itself out when your opponent threatens one of your monsters, for any sort of effect, you just return this back to the Etch deck and take one of your other Ritual Beast monsters and bring that back onto the field. It does limit it from being able to attack directly during the turn, but it means that you can actually dodge your opponent's card effects that are targeting this card. The summoning condition is also pretty simple, as you'll be running both Ritual Beast Tamers as well as Spiritual Beast monsters, and each can integrate with each other very well. Ritual Beast Ulti Rare Rutari is a wind attribute psychic type link effect monster. It's a link 4 with 2600 attack points and requires 3+ effect monsters. Neither player can contribute cards to activate the card or effect. You can only use each of the following effects of Ritual Beast Ulti Rare Rutari once per turn. You can target one of your banished Ritual Beast cards, return it to the hand or Etch deck, then immediately after this effect resolves, you can normal summon one Ritual Beast monster from your hand. During your opponent's turn, as a quick effect, you can target one Ritual Beast card you control, and one card your opponent controls, banish them. So this card does require 4 cards in order to summon it. It can be a little bit tricky and a high investment, but it does restrict both players from triplicate cards to activate a card or effect, so it is a way of mitigating certain cards from activating, be that monsters, spell or trap cards. Once per turn, just by targeting one of your banished Ritual Beast cards, you're able to return it either to the hand or the extra deck, so that's going to refuel your hand or the extra deck in order for you to bring out those monsters again. And once this card has used that effect, you're just instantly able to summon a Ritual Beast monster from your hand. And during the opponent's turn, just by targeting a Ritual Beast card you have, and a card your opponent controls, you banish them. Ritual Beast monsters can be easily accessed from the banish pile, whereas I highly doubt that a lot of what your opponent is running will be able to do the same. Ritual Beast Inheritance is a continuous spell card. The effect is monsters your opponent controls lose 200 attack for each different type among the Ritual Beast monsters you control. You can only use each of the following effects of Ritual Beast Inheritance once per turn. You can reveal one Ritual Beast monster in your hand, add one Ritual Beast monster with a different type from your deck to your hand, then discard one card. If 2 or more monsters are special summoned to your field at the same time, except during a damage step, you can target one monster on the field and change its battle position. So with this card, it can reduce your opponent's attack points for each different type of Ritual Beast you've got. I think you've got quite a variety there, so you can get at least 400 or so attack points off your opponent's monsters. And technically, this card can actually stack up, so if you had maybe all 3 of these on the field, and you had more monsters of different typings, you could have your opponent be losing over 1,000 attack points each monster. This card also means that you can reveal a Ritual Beast monster in your hand and just add a Ritual Beast monster with a different type, so it adds consistency and drawing into what you need as and when you need it. The other side of it is you have to then discard a card, so there is a cost to that, but you will be discarding whatever is not necessary for the time. If 2 or more monsters are special summoned to your field at the same time, they can do that because often you can get both the Spiritual Beast and the Ritual Beast out at the same point, as there are multiple effects that kind of integrate those effects together. You're just able to switch the battle position of a monster, be that yours or your opponent's. Toy Soldier is a light attribute warrior type level 4 with 1500 attack and 1000 defense. You can set this card from your hand to your spell and trap zone as a spell card. You can only use each of the following effects of Toy Soldier once per turn. If this set card in the spell and trap zone is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon this card. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add one toy box from your deck to your hand, or if you control toy box, you can add one level 4 light monster instead. So this is part of a variety of different archetypes. There are different monsters that are able to set themselves kind of to the spell and trap zone. There are alternative monsters that can do that. For example, Silver Sentinel can do that. You also have Toy Magician, which I think is part of this toy archetype, and is probably one of the most, it's one of the newest members that you can rely on. This card is able to, if this is sent to the graveyard, so you can actually either send it yourself or your opponent can send it by actually targeting it, just special summon this card straight away, so you can actually waste one of your opponent's resources. And if this card happens to be normal or special summoned, you're just instantly able to bring out either the toy box, or if you already have a toy box on your field, just a level 4 light attribute monster instead, so you do have that flexibility. Toy Tank is a light attribute machine type level 4 with 1000 attack and 2100 defense. You can set this card from your hand to your spell and trap zone as a spell. You can only use each of the following effects of Toy Tank once per turn. If the set card in the spell and trap zone is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon this card. You can attribute this monster to special summon one level 6 or lower monster from your hand, or if you control Toy Box, you can special summon one level 6 or lower monster from your graveyard instead, except Toy Tank. This, like the previous monster, the Toy Soldier, is able to set itself instantly to the spell and trap zone. And if this sent card is sent to the graveyard, you're able to just special summon this card. By attributing this monster, you can bring out a level 6 or lower monster from your hand. But if you also have the toy box on the field, you can opt to special summon a level 6 or lower monster from the graveyard instead. So if you have toy box on the field, you're able to get both options, whichever you prefer. It's not a particularly powerful card as it has 2100 defense, so it's a good defense monster, but it has no offense really to it. Toy Box is a continuous spell card. Once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can send one face-down card you control to the graveyard, destroy that opponent's monster. Once per turn, you can activate one of these effects. From your hand, deck, face-up monster zone, and or graveyard, choose up to 2 monsters with toy in their original names that can set themselves from the hand as a spell and set them in your spell and trap zone as spells. The other effect is destroy up to 2 cards in your spell and trap zone. So this is the card that ties the deck together. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you're just able to take a face-down card you control to the graveyard and destroy that monster. And if you happen to have sent any toy monsters to the graveyard to activate this effect, that triggers off their effect that recovers them, and then triggers off an additional effect from that to search for another card. You're able to, with its initial effect, also set 2 monsters with toy from the hand deck face up in the monster zone or the graveyard, so that's effectively most places outside of the banishment, and they can be used. And then you also have the option of destroying up to 2 cards in your spell and trap zones. With this effect, you're able to then re-trigger those effects, continuing with the amount of advantage you get. Electro Blaster is a fire attribute machine at type level 4 with 1800 attack and 1400 defense. If you normal or special summon a fire monster, except during a damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then you can send one level 8 pyro monster from your deck to graveyard. You can only use this effect of Electro Blaster once per turn. Once per turn, if a spell card is activated except during a damage step, you can make all fire monsters you currently control gain 300 attack points. My confusion with this card is actually what does it work with? I can think of Volcanics as an example, as it does react with fire attribute monsters, and they do have a couple of level 8 monsters, so that would make sense. If you're considering the fact if you normal or special summon a fire monster, so that's fine, it's either way, you're just instantly able to special summon this card. You're then pitching a level 8 pyro monster, so that would make sense to pitch the Volcanic Emperor, as that card can actually revive itself from the graveyard. And also, if a spell is activated, which you do have quite a few of those with the Blaze Accelerator cards, most of those Accelerator cards, except for the trap one, can trigger off this effect, and then all your fire monsters gain an additional 300 attack points. If you guys know of any other decks that kind of work with this, I think Fire Kings could work, as they have their level 8 monster. I think as well Snake Eyes is another example where this would work. Division is a fire attribute machine type level 2 with 200 attack and defense. You contribute all face-up divisions you control, special summon up to twice that many machine tokens, machine fire level 1 with 200 attack and defense, and each time one is destroyed, your opponent takes 500 damage. If this card is banished, you can target any number of tokens you control, destroy them. You can only use each effect of division once per turn. The purpose of this card is to do as much burn damage to the opponent as possible, and by just tributing all face-up divisions that you have, you can special summon up to twice that many tokens. This means that if you've got 3 divisions and you tribute all of them, you can have an entire field's worth of these tokens, but that means 500 points of damage each. That's 2,500 points of damage. And if this card happens to have been banished, then you're able to just trigger off the destruction of your tokens instead, rather than relying on your opponent. It's okay as an effect, but I would probably use those tokens more towards a link summon of a link monster than, or a synchro monster, rather than just for burn damage. You sometimes have to think further ahead than just the immediate potential you can do with this burn effect damage. Oil is a normal spell card. Target up to 2 level 4 or lower fire monsters with different names in your graveyard, add them to your hand. You can only activate 1 oil per turn. There is another card which it works quite similar to this. It's called Fire Recovery, and it basically does the same thing, except I think you can also draw an additional card when that card's in the graveyard by banishing it, so that's actually better than this one is. But if you just want it for a simple effect, this can be run in any of those types of fire attribute decks. So I'm thinking anything from your boxes, to your Snake Eyes, to your Infernoble monsters, to the Volcanics, and there are probably a whole list of other cards that can actually work and integrate with this, as it requires the entire attribute of fire rather than just the pyro type. It is restricted as well to only level 4 or lower monsters. But I also think of it a bit like that Dark Factory of Mass Production. That card recovers 2 monsters, but they're restricted to only being normal types. Ebon's Sun is a continuous spell card. If a face-up monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can gain life points equal to their combined original attack. If a monster is special summoned face-up from your graveyard except during a damage step, you can target one of them, it gains 1000 attack. If a spell or trap is discarded from your hand to the graveyard except during a damage step, you can target one of them, add it to your hand. You can only use each effect of Ebon's Sun once per turn. This is one of those strange interaction-based cards which I've never seen before, and it has multiple effects depending on the circumstances that you face. With the first effect, just if a monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you gain those life points back. That is a way of protecting your life points. If a monster is special summoned face up from your graveyard, you're able to boost its attack points by 1000 points, so that is quite decent for actually getting over some of your opponent's higher attack monsters. And if a spell or trap is discarded from your hand to the graveyard, that's sometimes used as part of a cost. You're able to recover one of them back to the hand. It's a way of adding to your consistency and often mitigating the cost that you would normally incur with various monster and spell and trap effects. Red Lotus King Flame Crime is a fire attribute fiend type level 3 with 1700 attack and 300 defense. During the main phase, if you control a fiend tuner or your opponent controls a special summoned monster, as a quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is special summoned, you can inflict 400 damage to your opponent for each fire monster you control with different names. If this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can send one normal trap from your deck to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of Red Lotus King Flame Crime once per turn. As soon as I've seen this card, I was instantly thinking it's a Jack Atlas card. It works perfectly with his Resonator archetype, considering all of his Resonators are fiend-based tuners. This enables you to go into your synchro plays a lot quicker. It can also special summon itself if your opponent has a special summoned monster on the field. And in doing so, you can instantly inflict 400 damage to your opponent, times the number of fire monsters you currently have on the field with different names. So if you have maybe 4 or 5 of those, you can do the maximum amount of damage of about 2000 life points to your opponent. And when this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, just by sending a normal trap from deck to the graveyard, hopefully it has a secondary effect which works within the graveyard. I'm thinking of things like Breakthrough Skill, which can actually trigger off their effect by banishing themselves. There are probably other examples. If you know of any, put those in the comments down below. Synchro Creed is a normal spell card. If a synchro monster is on the field, draw 1 card. Then if 3 or more synchro monsters are on the field, you can draw 1 more card. You can only activate 1 Synchro Creed per turn. This is a draw card as though for the various synchro monsters you have on yours and your opponent's field, as it applies to both. If you only have a synchro monster on the field, you just draw once. But if 3 or more synchro monsters are on the field, then you can draw 2 cards instead of the 1. This considers both yours and your opponent's field, and it makes sense even from the artwork. The monsters that you have there are 3 of the Naturia Beast ones. There is the one that negates effects, monster effects. There is one that negates the trap cards, and there is one which is just a generic one. It's their highest attack monster, but it has no effect to it. This card would be useful in something like a Stardust-based deck, or even a Red Dragon Archfiend deck, or Black Rose Dragon would also work with this. Gathering Light is a continuous spell card. You can banish 1 monster you control and 1 synchro monster in your graveyard. That is a Power Tool monster or level 7 or 8 dragon monster. Then target 1 card your opponent controls, destroy it. Level 7 or higher synchro monsters you control gain 400 attack for each of your banished level 7 or higher synchro monsters. Once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, while you have a banished synchro monster, you can negate the attack. This is quite an unusual card just by banishing a monster you control, and a synchro monster in the graveyard it has to be a power tool dragon, or it has to be a level 7 or 8 dragon monster. You can destroy one of your opponent's cards, be that a spell, a trap, or a monster. If a level 7 or higher synchro monster you control gains 400 attack for each of your banished level 7 or higher synchro monsters, provided with the first effect you should have at least 2 of those that are banished. The more you've got, the more attack points those monsters have, and they're each applying with that effect. If you've got multiple of them, and you've got, say, even just the 2 basic ones, that's an extra 800 points boost. And each turn you're able to just negate the first attack that you need to. And the nice thing about it is it's a little bit different to Cyber Barrier Dragon. With Cyber Barrier Dragon, that card can only negate the first attack that your opponent declares. This determines you have full choice of when you use this effect. Earthbound Resonance is a continuous trap card. The effect is if a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck is destroyed by a card effect, except during a damage step, you can target one of them. Each player takes damage equal to half its attack. When your Dark Synchro monster special summoned from the extra deck is targeted for an attack, you can target one card on the field to destroy it. You can only use each effect of Earthbound Resonance once per turn. When I first saw this, I just referenced the Earthbound Immortals instantly from this. It happens to be when a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck is destroyed by a card effect. You're just able to inflict burn damage to your opponent and to yourself equal to half of its attack, so your opponent isn't likely to try and trigger this type of effect off. And provided it's a Dark Synchro monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, has been targeted for an attack, you're instantly able to destroy a card on the field, be that a spell, a trap, or a monster, and it can be on yours or your opponent's field. Electrode Beast Cation is a light attribute Thunder type, level 2 with 300 attack and 100 defense. If this card is normal summoned, you can add one Electrode Beast Anion from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Then immediately after this effect resolves, you can normal summon one level 4 or lower Thunder monster. Also, you cannot special summon from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except Light Exceeds monsters. You can target one other Thunder monster you control that has a level. This card's level becomes that monster's until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect of Electrode Beast Cation once per turn. This card's purpose is to go for effectively a 1 turn 1 card Exceed summon. It can copy the level of another monster you have that is a light, which is a Thunder type monster. That means you do have more variety than going into just a rank 2 play, but even within that you've got the sprite monsters that work well with this, and you're instantly able to bring out the Electrode Beast Anion from your deck or graveyard back to the hand, as well as conducting an additional normal summon. Electrode Beast Anion is a light attribute Thunder type level 2 with 300 attack and 100 defense. If this card is normal summoned, you can make this card a level 4. Then you can add one Spirit Converter from your deck or graveyard to your hand. You can target one other card you control, send both it and this card to the graveyard, and if you do, draw one card. You can only use each effect of Electrode Beast Anion once per turn. When this card is just normal summoned, you're able to instantly make this a level 4. That means you can go into a rank 4 Exceeds play instantly. You're then able to just search for a Spirit Converter from the deck or graveyard back to the hand, and you're able to send both this and another card to the graveyard in exchange to draw one card depending on the situation you're in. Sacrifice Level Up is a normal spell card. Target one Exceeds monster you control, banish 2 materials from it, and if you do, special summon one Exceeds monster from its deck whose rank is 1 higher than that monster, but it cannot attack this turn. You can only activate one Sacrifice Level Up per turn. The purpose of this card is it does allow you to go into a higher rank monster without really too much cost. A lot of the other cards only allow you to go into certain ranks, and they're usually stuck to basically their typing or their attribute, or they have to be kind of a similar naming. For example, with the Chronomalies, they pretty much have to be along the Chronomaly line. Similarly, with the Gimmick Puppets, they tend to be quite restricted as of themselves. often it's a case of you're locked into the archetype. Even with things such as Heritage Force, which was their version for the Arclight brothers to use, it was quite decent. This card is a bit like Rank Up Astral Force, but worse. That ranks up those monsters by 2 ranks. This is only by 1 rank, and it requires you to get rid of 2 of its materials. Unless it's a monster that happened to have had 3 materials on it, you're bringing out a monster that is not going to have an effect unless it has an automated effect when it's summoned. It would have been nice if this card had allowed you to attach this card as, a material towards it, but otherwise you're just using a vanilla style of monster from this effect. White Circle Reef is a normal spell card. Target 1 fish monster you control, destroy that fish monster, and if you do, add 1 monster with the same name it had on the field from your deck to your hand, or if you controlled a fish synchro monster, when you activated this card, you can special summon it instead. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 2 fish monsters with the same name in your graveyard, place one of the 2 on the bottom of the deck, and if you do, special summon the other. You can only use each effect of White Circle Reef once per turn. This card confuses me a bit as to why it's somewhat beneficial, as unless you've somewhat negated the effect of your fish monster that you have on the field and you actually want the effect of the card, that's why you consider replacing one for the other. But otherwise, it's just very unusual. It's quite bizarre. You also have to have a fish synchro monster on the field for you to special summon the monster, which means even more investment within the deck. By banishing this card, you can take 2 fish monsters with the same name in your graveyard. One gets shoved back onto the bottom of the deck, and the other one you get to have the option of special summoning. That one that ends up on the bottom of the deck is unlikely to be recovered unless you've got specific search cards, or you're able to shuffle your deck so many times as for it not to be a problem. Arbitration of White is a continuous trap card. You can target 1 fish monster you control. It is treated as a tuner this turn. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can discard 1 fish monster, change all monsters your opponent controls to defense position. If your fish monster is destroyed by battle or sent to the graveyard, you can send this face-up card from your spell and trap zone to the graveyard, special summon 1 fish monster from your graveyard. You can only use each effect of Arbitration of White once per turn. First part of the effect just lets you take a fish monster you control and treat it as a tuner for the turn. This can be useful as you've got various monsters within the deck, and if you haven't got any tuners on you and you've got monsters that are non-tuners, it would be a good way for you to synchro summon into your other monsters. As soon as an opponent's monster declares an attack, just by discarding a fish monster, you're able to change all of your opponent's monsters to defense position. This can be useful as a way of protecting your monsters to a point where you can actually synchro summon into something strong enough to get over their threats. And if your fish monster is destroyed by battle or sent to the graveyard, simply by sending this card from your face-up spell and trap zone, you're able to special summon a fish monster from your graveyard, so there are multiple ways of getting advantage through this card. Synchro Panic is a continuous trap card. The effect is to activate only if a face-up synchro monster you control is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect. By targeting one of them, special summon 1 tuner and 1 or more non-tuners from your graveyard, whose total levels equal the targeting monsters, and if you do, they cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects this turn. Neither player can synchro summon. Destroy this card during your 3rd standby phase after activation. This card is very much quite an unusual one. By activating this card, so as you've got a synchro monster that was destroyed by battle or card effect, you can take one of them, special summon a tuner and 1 or more non-tuners from the graveyard whose total levels equal the targeted monsters. Okay, so it's a little bit like desynchro, which is used, but this works in retaliation to your synchro monster being destroyed, as opposed to just actually splitting apart your synchro monster, which is how desynchro works. They are protected from being destroyed by battle or card effects during the turn, so it's a good way of protecting those cards and then maybe using them for other purposes. But it does limit you from synchro summoning, and this restriction lasts for 3 turns after its activation. During this card, destroy this card during your third standby phase after activation. So it's a hard restriction to synchros. Mirror Match is a fire attribute spellcaster level 1 with 0 attack and defense. If this card is in your hand, you can reveal 3 cards with different names from your hand and or deck that match the names of 3 different cards in your opponent's graveyard. And if you do, special summon this card. When your opponent activates a card or effect as a quick effect, you can send this card summoned by its previous effect to the graveyard, send one card with the same name as that opponent's card from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard, and if you do, negate the activation. You can only use each effect of Mirror Match once per turn. I get the pun, it's like mirror match, you know, it's a female character, very clever. They have sometimes these kind of fun naming systems attached to them. First part of the effect, it has to be revealing 3 cards with different names from the hand or deck that match the names of 3 cards in your opponent's graveyard. Now, this requires you to have a very similar style of deck and can really only work on the hand trap types of cards. It's anything that's very generic, so Call by the Grave, Effect Veil, so Snowlet, the Cherry Blossom card, any of those style of cards, Lockbird, another example, DD Crow, this would have the ability to kind of negate and shut down those types of effects. But it's so specific, the likelihood of you managing to do this and for your opponent to have gone through exactly 3 cards that are from their deck that is gone to the graveyard that you have in your deck is highly unlikely. There's no point in even wasting your time on even looking at this card. That's my personal opinion of it. Ace Spades Speculation is a light attribute warrior type fusion effect monster. It's a level 7 with 2500 attack, 2500 defense. It requires a monster with 2500 or more attack and 1 face down defense position monster with 2500 or less defense. You can only special summon Ace Spades Speculation once per turn. You contribute 1 attack position monster and 1 face down defense position monster to special summon this card from your graveyard. This card gains the following effects based on its battle position. If it's in attack position, it gains attack equal to the highest original attack among monsters your opponent controls, your choice if tied. In defense position, it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. The summoning requirement on this card is one where technically you could use some sort of super polymerization for it, but it is, as you can use it on like a face down defense position monster, but it is quite an unusual requirement. I've never seen anything quite like it. This card can only be summoned once per turn, which is fine. It's not really, you wouldn't be running more than one of these. And by tributing an attack position monster and a face down defense position monster, you're just instantly able to recover this card from your graveyard. If it's in attack position, this takes on the attack points of the highest attack monster your opponent controls, so you can actually always make this card kind of the biggest threat. It's a bit like the Wicked Avatar always has 100 attack points more than the monster on the field that has the highest attack currently. With the defense position, it keeps it in a defense mode and keeps the protection in that it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. So it's a good way of stalling over various cards so long as you need, extra time to draw into what you require. Overall, I think the card is quite unique and it's quite a specific fusion monster. I don't see too many people looking to play it, but it'd be interesting if someone actually playtests this and sees what it can do. Wonky Quartet is an Earth attribute beast type, exceeds rank 4 with 0 attack and 2600 defense. It requires 2 or more level 4 monsters. It's unaffected by other card effects if this card is exceed summoned. Also, once per turn during your standby phase, attach the top 3 cards of your deck to this card as material, then apply the following effect based on the number of monsters attached to this card. 4 or less, give control of this card to your opponent. 5 or more, take 400 damage for each material this card has, and if you do, destroy all monsters you control. I don't actually understand what the benefit of this card is. It's really strange. Firstly, it has decent defense points. 2600 isn't bad. Its summoning conditions aren't too difficult either, as you need just 2 or more level 4 monsters. It's unaffected by other card effects. That's usually a good thing, but in this card, maybe not so much. And as soon as this card is exceed summoned, during this, or also once during the standby phase, you're able to attach the top 3 cards of your deck to this card as material. If you happen to have 4 or less, this card goes straight to the opponent. And if it has 5 or more, you take 400 damage for each material this card has. And if you do, destroy all monsters your opponent controls. So I'm guessing you want to give this over to the opponent and then to have them attach more materials onto this card so that they can take, effectively 2,000 plus points of life point damage, and it self-destructs all of their monsters. Meeting this condition it's just so bizarre. It's a weird one, and it's going to be one of those types of rogue strategies. Maybe some will break it, but it's a heavy investment into a very rogue deck that's not likely to work. Life Hack is a quick play spell card. The effect is to target one face-up monster on the field. Any damage your opponent takes this turn is halved. Also, that monster's attack becomes equal to your opponent's current life points until the end of this turn. During your main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard. Then target one face-up monster on the field. Any damage your opponent takes this turn is halved. Also, that monster's attack becomes equal to your current life points until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect of Life Hack once per turn. This is another one of those very weirdly designed cards. So, okay, you take a face-up monster on the field. Any damage your opponent takes is halved, so that's a bad thing. Also, that monster's attack becomes equal to your opponent's current life points. So you can take one of your monsters and then, say, for example, your opponent has 8,000 life points. It's just the start of the duel. You could actually make your monster's attack points 8,000. That's a good way of getting over your opponent and their biggest threat monsters. But in exchange, you're doing half the amount of damage. It's a fine exchange. It's not that big of a problem. And actually, sometimes getting over certain monsters is sometimes the easiest way through these types of effects. If you think of cards such as that Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon or any of these other cards which are unaffected by card effects, many of them have no battle protection effects. They're just purely from the unaffected by other card effects. Therefore, if you can get your particular monster to over that monster's attack points, you're more likely to just get over their biggest threats with a very simple 2-card combination. This card, when it's banished from your graveyard, you can take a face-up monster on the field. Your opponent also takes half the damage that turn, and that monster's attack becomes equal to your current life points until the end of this turn. So it actually takes you away from your opponent's life points and reflects it actually onto your life points. This effect can really be used twice. Bunch of Beast Bodies is a normal trap card. Change all monsters that were not normal or special summoned this turn to defense position. For the rest of this turn, a player who controls a defense position monster cannot declare attacks with monsters that were normal or special summoned this turn. The purpose of this card is, if you already have an established board that your opponent has, then they're punished and all of those monsters are changed to defense position, and anything you summoned fresh on your turn is unaffected by this effect. Bear in mind that all of your monsters will have to have been summoned fresh in the turn in order for you to actually declare any attacks in the same turn. It's very gimmicky and it might work in 1 or 2 situations. For example, if your opponent's kind of clear-boarded all of your field the previous turn and you only really have the choice of, going into fresh monsters. Pillar of the Future Cyanos is a light attribute machine type level 1 with 500 attack and 1500 defense. This card is always treated as a Sky Striker card. You can discard one spell or special summon this card from your hand. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon one Sky Striker Ace Rose from your deck or graveyard. Also, you cannot special summon from the edge deck for the rest of this turn except machine monsters. You can banish this card from your graveyard, take one of your Sky Striker Ace Rose that is banished or in your graveyard, and either add it to your hand or special summon it. You can only use each effect of Pillar of the Future, Cyanus, once per turn. This card has recently been introduced within Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and is used 1 or 2 copies of. It's pretty easy to summon as it just requires you to discard a spell card. Sky Strikers have so many spell cards within the deck, very easy to achieve. When this card is normal special summoned, you just instantly special summon a Sky Striker Ace Rose from the deck or graveyard, and you're able to, even though you're limited to summoning only machine type monsters for the rest of the turn from the extra deck, all of the Sky Striker Ace Link monsters are machine types, and by banishing this card you can take one of the Sky Striker Ace Rose that is banished or in the graveyard, either choosing to special summon it or add it back to your hand for the next turn. Sky Striker's Ace Azalea Temperance is a Dark Attribute Machine type Link 3 monster with 2,500 attack points. It requires 2 or more monsters, including a Link monster, to summon it. Must first be Link summoned. If this card is special summoned, you can banish 1 spell from your hand or graveyard, then target 1 monster your opponent controls with 2,500 or less attack. Equip that face-up monster to this card as an equip spell. You can only use this effect of Sky Striker Ace Azalea Temperance once per turn. When this card is destroyed by battle, you can special summon 1 other Sky Striker monster from your hand or graveyard. The summoning condition on this card isn't too difficult, as there are many ways of you bringing this card out within the deck, and just by banishing a spell from your hand or graveyard, you can just take a monster your opponent controls. Provided it has 2,500 or less attack, it instantly becomes an equip card, and since it's equipped, unless your opponent can destroy that equipped card, they might not be able to use it, especially if it usually benefits their strategy. It also means that when this card is destroyed by battle, you're instantly able to recover a Sky Striker monster, preventing you from losing any advantage. Blaze, Supreme Ruler of All Dragons, is a fire attribute dragon type, exceeds rank 7 with 2,800 attack and 1,800 defense. It requires 2 level 7 monsters, and once per turn you can detach 1 material from this card, destroy 2 cards, 1 from your hand or field and 1 your opponent controls. You can banish a total of 2 fire and or dragon monsters from your hand and or graveyard, special summon this card from your graveyard, but return it to the extra deck when it leaves the field. You can only use this effect of Blaze Supreme Ruler of All Dragons once per turn. This card is a generic rank 7 as it only needs just 2 generalized level 7s, it's not specific to any style of deck, and it's pretty easy to summon. 2,800 attack points for a rank 7 is decent, and once per turn, just by detaching material, you have to destroy 1 card from your hand or field and 1 your opponent controls. So it makes sense if you can target a card you've got that has a destruction-based effect, in that it can float into something else or to have an additional benefit. This card can also be revived by banishing 2 fire and or dragon monsters from the hand graveyard. The purpose of this is just really for it to become another body on the field. It's got decent attack points even without materials, and even becoming a vanilla monster, it's fine. It does go back to the extra deck when it leaves the field. This is also quite useful, as then you can potentially summon it once again without having to run recovery cards to bring it back to the extra deck. Archfiend's Advent is a Dark Attribute Fiend type level 6 with 2,500 attack and 1,200 defense. While you control Shining Sarcophagus, you can normal summon this card without tributing. Other monsters you control gain 500 attack points during your turn only. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can target 1 monster your opponent controls, take control of it until the end phase, but that monster cannot attack unless you control Shining Sarcophagus after this effect was activated. You can only use this effect of Archfiend's Advent once per turn. This is the Millennium version of the Summoned Skull. It's kind of the Shining Sarcophagus that was supported by Yu-Gi-Oh! This card instantly allows you to normal summon it without a tribute, so long as you've got that other card on the field, and other monsters you control gain 500 attack during your turn. That's a decent boost to each of them. It does restrict itself, but that's fine. When this card is normal or special summoned, you can instantly take control of one of your opponent's monsters, and it's not restricted to typing, attribute, attack or defense points, or by its level. You can take whatever you want. It only stays with you until the end phase, but that's fine as you can tribute that card off, or you can use it for some other purpose. But that monster cannot attack unless you already have a Shining Sarcophagus on the field when this effect was activated. So it can actually be used as part of a threat against your opponent. Phantom of Yubel is a Dark Attribute Fiend type fusion level 9 with 0 attack and 0 defense. It requires a Yubel monster and 1 Fiend monster with 0 attack and defense. It must be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards from your hand, field and or graveyard into the deck. It cannot be used as fusion material, and it cannot be destroyed by battle. Also, you take no damage from battles involving this card. When your opponent activates a monster effect, as a quick effect, you contribute this card. The activated effect becomes your opponent destroys 1 Yubel monster in their hand, deck or field. You can only use this effect of Phantom of Yubel once per turn. The summoning conditions on this card aren't too difficult, as Yubel is in of itself a fiend monster with 0 attack and defense, so it can be used 2 Yubels, and there are other cards which meet this condition as well within that deck. Its summoning, it's fine, as long as you don't need a polymerization, it just returns by contact fusion, and it cannot be destroyed by battle. You take no battle damage from battles involving this card, and actually if your opponent activates a monster effect, it destroys one of your Yubel monsters, triggering off its effect to let you summon the higher level Yubel monster. It also wastes your opponent's response, and it's quite similar to something like some of the Dark World cards, as they often require you to discard, and because they're a discard effect, they then trigger off their effects as a result of that discard. Ancient Gear Dragon is an Earth Attribute Machine type level 5 with 500 attack and 2500 defense. It cannot be special summoned. If you control no monsters or all monsters you control are machine monsters, you can summon this card without tributing. When your opponent activates a spell or trap card or an effect, as a quick effect, you can send to the graveyard 1 machine monster from your hand or face up the field, or 1 Ancient Gear Golem from your deck, negate that effect. You can only use this effect of Ancient Gear Dragon once per turn. This card is actually something that's been useful and needed within the Ancient Gears deck. Many of them are pretty much monsters that can attack during the battle phase and shut down your opponent's activated effects, but outside of the immunity of the ultimate Ancient Gear Golem, most of the other ones have no real immunity outside of the battle phase. This card is not only able to summon itself, so long as you've got Earth Machine monsters or you have no monsters, but also when your opponent activates a effect, just by sending a machine from the hand or face up on the field, or your Ancient Gear Golem from the deck, you could just shut down that effect. It is a once per turn effect, but it might give the Ancient Gears some sort of fight back against other card interactions. Genix Controller is a Dark Attribute Machine type tuner monster. It's got level 3 with 1400 attack and 1200 defense. This is a basis tuner monster for all of the Genix monsters, and it's very much used consistently within the deck. There are a couple of other tuner monsters that have been introduced recently that can copy the name Genix Controller, and therefore you almost don't need this card, as those cards can just be comparable and they often have some sort of additional effect to them. The legendary Exodia Incarnate is a Dark Attribute spellcaster at level 10 with question mark attack and 0 defense. It cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned from your hand by attributing 1 Forbidden 1 monster and cannot be special summoned by other ways. This card gains 1000 attack for each Forbidden 1 monster in your graveyard. It's unaffected by other card effects, and once per turn during your end phase, you can add 1 Forbidden 1 monster from your graveyard to your hand. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can reveal any number of Forbidden 1 monsters in your hand, and if you do, draw 1 card for each. The purpose of this card is actually to bring out the Exodia itself, because what it's doing is it's returning the Forbidden monsters from your graveyard back to your hand, slowly over time during each of your end phases, steadily bringing those monsters back to trigger the original effect of the Exodia. The benefit of this card as well is it does gain 1000 attack points for each Forbidden 1 monster in your graveyard, but as you continually recover those cards, this card becomes steadily weaker. It also has the ability, when it is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, by just revealing the Forbidden monsters you have in your hand, you draw one card for each. You're hopefully banking on being able to draw into the final pieces in order to win in that turn. The End of Anubis is a Dart attribute Fiend type level 6 with 2500 attack and 0 defense. While this card is face up on the field, all effects of spell, trap, and monster cards that target a card in the graveyard or that activate in the graveyard are negated. This is a decent way of preventing your opponent from activating anything effectively from the graveyard. If you're not planning to use anything in your graveyard, you might as well lock your opponent from doing the same. I also think it's quite powerful for a level 6 monster. It's got 2500 attack points, and there aren't really any restrictions to it. If you can special summon this card, by all means do that, as it's an instant way of bringing the effect on board and online. Guard Dog is an Earth attribute beast type level 3 with 1500 attack and 500 defense. Its effect is flip, your opponent cannot special summon for the rest of this turn. I know there is a couple of flip based decks that can use this card as part of it, and it effectively stops your opponent from special summoning each and every turn by just constantly flipping from face up position to face down and back and forth. That's really annoying as a strategy. It's a very old card and probably needed some form of reprint. I mean, let's actually have a look and see where it is. It's really old. It's from Enemy of Justice, and that was the 17th of May 2006 worldwide. So yeah, as you're seeing it, it is, well, 18 years old. That is why it needed the reprint. Substitute is a water attribute aqua type level 1 with 100 attack and 2000 defense. You contribute one monster to special summon one frog monster from your deck except Frog the Jam. Frog monsters except Frog the Jam cannot be destroyed by battle. This is part of the whole frog archetype. It's a mini set of frog based monsters that aim to bring out the Xyz monster and actually to steal your opponent's monsters and to negate their effects through this. There's also another card which is it's a field spell called Wetlands, which works across any level 2 or below water, aqua type monsters, which this fits the bill, and it gives them 1200 additional attack points, so you can actually make quite a decent kind of string of frog-based monsters just through a couple of interactions with a couple of different cards. Genex Power Planet is a light attribute spellcaster type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. When this card is normal summoned, you can add one level 3 Genex effect monster from your deck to your hand. This is a searcher for the deck, so it adds to the consistency of it, but you aren't likely to be running too many of these given the attack and defense stats of this card. Genex Ally Duradark is a dart attribute machine type level 4 with 1800 attack and 200 defense. Once per turn during the main phase, you can select one face-up attack position monster your opponent controls with the same attribute as this card and destroy it. This card cannot attack the turn you activate this effect. This is a method of destroying your opponent's cards, and it's very consistent with its effect. There's another monster in this deck that can adapt your monster's attribute, so by changing this monster's attribute to whatever your opponent has on their field, you can then trigger off this effect. It does have the downside of negating your ability to attack for the rest of that turn with this monster, but you would often rather trade off guaranteeing the destruction of your opponent's monster than to try and attack into something where they might have a face-down spell or trap card which will interact with this card. Genex Ally Birdman is a dart attribute machine type tuner, level 3 with 1400 attack and 400 defense. You can return one face-up monster you control to the hand, special summon this card from the hand, banish it when it leaves the field. Also, it gains 500 attack if the return monster was wind on the field. The purpose of this card is it benefits actually resetting a lot of your monsters. Anything that has a normal summon based effect that cannot really do it itself can be returned back to the hand and then resummoned to use that effect. This card does get the benefit of an additional 500 attack points, but that's quite mute as it's being used as a tuner, so it's most likely hit for a synchro summon of a monster rather than to use this as a beat stick in and of itself. I should also note that this card is actually also receiving an alternative art that will be found in this set. Scrap Goblin is an Earth Attribute Beast Warrior tuner effect monster. It's a level 3 with 0 attack and 500 defense. This card cannot be destroyed by battle. If this face-up defense position card is selected as an attack target, destroy this card at the end of the battle phase. If this card is destroyed by the effect of a scrap card and sent to the graveyard, you can select one scrap monster in your graveyard except Scrap Goblin and add it to your hand. This is part of the scrap archetype. It has the ability to protect itself from being destroyed by battle, which can be useful as most tuners are unable to effectively tune on their own. You're going to need to wait for things to be summoned to the field to synchro summon into something. By having this protected, you can then almost guarantee that. Similar to something like Dark Resonator, which does have a once per turn battle destruction protection effect, and there's another which is the Clockwork Resonator that does provide either a destruction of battle or a destruction of card effect protection once per turn. If this card is destroyed by the effect of a scrap, which most of the cards like to do, it provides them with additional benefits. You can take a scrap monster in your graveyard and add it back to your hand, so that's a form of recovery. Infernoid Harmodic is a fire attribute fiend type level 3 with 1600 attack and 0 defense. It cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned from your hand by banishing one Infernoid monster from your hand or graveyard, while the total levels and ranks of all effect monsters you control are 8 or lower, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. Once per turn, you can target one monster on the field, destroy it. This card cannot attack the turn you activate this effect. Once per turn, during your opponent's turn, you can tribute one monster, then target one card in your opponent's graveyard, banish it. This is a quick effect. This card is able to disrupt your opponent in a couple of ways. It does have a unique condition to it, as you do have to banish an Inferno monster from the hand or graveyard, provided its total levels and ranks are 8 or lower, and this cannot be special summoned in any other way, so it is restricted to its own conditions. Once a turn, just by targeting a monster on the field, you can just straight away destroy it. It doesn't matter if it's yours or your opponent's. It does sacrifice its ability to attack for the rest of the turn once that card's activated, and once per turn during the opponent's turn, so this is quite useful. By tributing a monster you've got, you can take an opponent's card in their graveyard and banish it. Very good if they're trying to set up for a particular type of play, and especially if they've just thrown that card into the graveyard through the effect of a different monster.